talking about neurodiversity is something that I really value in terms of collective intelligence. So I really look forward to your presentation. I mean, you're on.
Okay, thank you, Bruce. Can you hear me, Bruce?
Yes, I can hear you now.
Okay, I don't know what happened there, but hi everybody, and it's a great privilege to be here. I'll give a bit of context to this, and then there's 15 minutes and 5 minutes of questions. So please, very happy to take any questions via the chat box, of course. But great privilege to be here. The genesis of all of this was that we formed a working group around neurodiversity, very much with the help of Daniela. Thank you, Daniela. And I know some people dialing in now were in that group, and we had a really good conversation. And I think this is a conversation which has bubbled up through 2020. Diversity and inclusion has increased in prominence in general in the world. So it's a good time to be able to check in on this particular subject. What I really want out of this is that everyone's a little bit more informed. Yep, but okay, more than that, to be a bit fired up, to take this conversation forward into your organizations, and also to appreciate the talent opportunity, particularly in a data context. Probably many, if not most, of the best data minds in the world maybe haven't had a conventionally wired brain. And the positive flip on this subject is that brains that may seem to have inherent weaknesses because they're wired differently have sometimes extraordinary compensating capabilities. So to make it really sort of quite simple, the plan for this presentation is to cover 3 areas. Why is this important? What is it? In some cases, that's not fully understood, so we can cover a bit of that. But most importantly, perhaps, how can you access this? So what's the very simple 1, 2, 3 of how you can gestate this conversation in your organizations, and hopefully plenty of time for Q&A as well. Just in terms of some of the context of why do I care about this conversation? Well, actually, my daughter was diagnosed with dyslexia at the age of 8. It explained a lot of the challenges she was having. As a family, we've seen the good, the bad, and the ugly, frankly. This visual is just of a hobby she did a while back, which was painting her eye, just as a kind of thing to pass time. So she's incredibly creative. Just don't ask her to spell. She struggles with writing essays, but she's brilliant at practical things and also very, very complex problems, including data problems. So just goes to show sort of how our minds are all wired in weird and wonderful ways, which is excellent. But in our case, it was a challenging time. And 10 years on, my daughter's just started university, albeit in UK lockdown, but anyway. And we've seen her go on that journey, and it really encouraged me to dig in a bit more. And so I suppose I've been an advocate of neurodiversity in all its forms for about 10 years, and have really tried to push that conversation in my organization and in the UK a bit more broadly. So that's why I care. In terms of why you should care, well, there's 2 reasons really. The first is this is about fairness. Why should people who have different brains, indeed, why should people with any difference be treated differently? So there's a strong social justice aspect to this. It's only what's really fair for people. Now, of course, you can say, well, diversity and inclusion has many different aspects. That is true. And you could say, well, it's not really a competition. But the reality is it is a competition. And the reality is that in most organizations, there's a finite amount of attention, resource, funding, energy, and therefore sometimes it's the less visible aspects of D&I which get focus and attention. And if I just sort of put that into sharp relief, you can find many articles around this, the misunderstanding of what neurodiversity brings, and often seen in a very derogatory and negative way. The same for other aspects of autism as relates to crime and homelessness and so on and so forth. So, so the first reason you should care is it's just what's fair, what's right, what's proper from a social justice point of view. But that probably wouldn't be enough in its own right. The other key aspect of this is that there's a huge amount of evidence that says that diversity drives performance, and almost any aspect of diversity. So McKinsey will give you the slides of the so many X over performance for making sure you're fully inclusive. And I think this is really where most of the people in this audience will get fired up, in that you kind of know that brilliant data people can transform a business problem, a brand problem, a problem in a sector, a problem in society. And that often doesn't come from normal brains. So this is about driving performance. And the reason I flag both things is that they are complementary. The justice aspect combined with the performance aspect, I think, makes it utterly compelling to really lean into the neurodiversity conversation and make it a critical and central part of your organization's diversity and inclusion activity. So I won't labor the what, because I wanted to do I won't labor the why, sorry, because I wanted to do a little bit on what without overrunning, and just explain in a little bit more detail what neurodiversity means. To be honest with you, if I'd done this a year ago, I think many people wouldn't have heard of the term. 6 months ago, many more would, and now it is growing in volume as a conversation. So maybe many people are already aware of this, but neurodiversity relates to anybody whose brain is not neurotypical. The first thing I'd say is there's a huge spectrum of, we're all unique, like our own brain DNA. So in some ways, it's a bit of a contradiction because we're all very, very different in the way our brains are wired. But to try and put some edges around it, and this does include people with autism, with ADHD, with dyslexia, with dysgraphia, with dyscalculia. There's all sorts of wonderful ways in which our brains are wired. And roughly, the key thing here is that it's about 1 in 7 people who have some form of sort of classical neurodiversity. The British Dyslexia Association characterises that more broadly as dyslexia as an umbrella term for about 9 different aspects of brain difference. But roughly, it's about 1 in 7 people. So of course, the thing to say is that you already have a lot of people in your team who have some form of neurodiversity. It's undeniable. You won't have been able to select them out even if you'd wanted to, because as we'll come on to, they have very often have very good coping mechanisms and find a way and have that resilience and bounce back ability to make it in the world. Just to put a little bit more edges on this slide, there's a huge risk of overgeneralization, frankly. And as, like I've said, DNA is unique as are people's brains. But here you get a bit of a sample of some of the positives that are on offer. So if I think about my daughter and her dyslexia, she's an incredibly visual thinker. She's extremely creative and very good at seeing the bigger picture and seeing how things connect. If I just pick one other example of people with dyspraxia, they may have their own challenges, but of course, again, they're characterized as being extremely innovative, very good from an EQ point of view, and very good from an interpersonal and team connection point of view. So again, it's a bit of an overgeneralization, but the reality is that there are many hidden talents just waiting to get out. And often those talents just haven't been given the recognition that they warrant. And let's just put a bit of gloss on that. Here's a slide which shows a small subsection of the amazing people who've had brains who are wired differently. Albert Einstein talked to the fact that his dyspraxia was such that he couldn't tie up his shoelaces. He also was autistic to some level, so it's believed, and also dyslexic, and yet one of the most brilliant minds on the planet. I'm sure you will have seen many of these examples, and it seems to be true that those people who disrupt the world have a different brain, and it seems so obvious that would be the case. So that's all great, all nice chat, but so what? How do you actually break into this, make the most of this opportunity, nourish this difference, and capitalize, if you like? So there are 3 very, very simple steps that I've experienced time and time again, organizations that have made headway in this area. The first is you need to give birth to the conversation. That might seem a sort of an obvious thing, but in many cases, it hasn't been normalized as a conversation within the organization. So if you think about the impact of George Floyd's death and Black Lives Matter, it's made the conversation much more mainstream around ethnicity. And that's a wonderful thing. And it's symbolic of the fact that all these D&I conversations need to kind of have a point of genesis, an ignition point, if you like. So what I've seen work really well in many organizations, including my own, is to make a bit of fanfare and very specifically to bring great speakers in who themselves have benefited from their neurodiversity and who really specifically say that their success has been because of their neurodiversity rather than despite it. So we've had some amazing people in, like Pip Jameson, the founder of the Dots, a lady called Ellie Gertz from NABS in the UK, an advertising organization in the UK, Wayne Deacon from the Huge organization, Huge agency, and a few others, just to make it normal. And I'll give you one specific example where that worked. Pip Jameson came in to talk to about 200 marketers, and she spoke for a little while, and she comes across extremely well. And she said, please put your hand up if you are dyslexic. I wasn't really expecting anybody to put their hand up, but I did know there were about 3 or 4 people with dyslexia in the team, and about 8 people put their hand up. And in an instant, Pip had normalized the conversation to make it okay. And if you can see others talking about it loudly and proudly, it normalizes it. So that's the first thing. And I think it's really important because we're talking about culture here. This is a cultural point about what's okay to talk about. And bear in mind, culture is sometimes what's the worst behavior that's tolerated. And if people are negative and denigratory and nasty about people whose brains are wired differently, then the conversation never gets started. So first off, we need to give birth to the conversation. These are sequential. You can't jump to recruitment. Sorry, I should have made that point. You can't just jump to recruitment. You've got to put the building blocks in place. So once you've given birth to the conversation, the next conversation is watering the plants, nurturing the talent you've already got. If you accept that you have at least a 1 in 7, and if many of your organizations are data-oriented, data literate, it's probably greater than that. But for many people will not have declared it, have maybe not had a diagnosis. And so the second part is about making the most of what you've already got. This has 2 parts. One is making reasonable adjustments for your staff with neurodiversity. Let's say that now are much more confident to come forward. And in the UK, this is no more than the law, but it often gets overlooked. But reasonable adjustments are often not very expensive or indeed cost nothing at all, but just make the working environment that much more suitable for your staff. The other side of this is the training for people managers, their acceptance, their respect, and also their understanding of the reasonable adjustments processes that you have. And I'll just give one example. About 5 years ago, somebody in our organization came forward and revealed to their people manager that they had dyslexia. And their people manager said, and I'm going to swear a very small bit here, said, don't give me that dyslexia shit. And you can imagine that was crushing for that individual because they now got the confidence to out themselves in a positive way, and they were left regretting it. And indeed, it is the truth. The British Dyslexia Association survey says that more than 50% of people regret coming out with their neurodiversity, which is terrible. Once you've got to that position, that you should meet a hostile reaction or a non-supportive reaction. So phase 2 is really about the nurturing what you've already got, respecting what you've already got, but both from the people manager side and also from the employee side. And then finally, and very quickly, that of course, this all builds to recruiting, going fishing. Where can you access more of the talent that's out there? As I said, I don't think you can jump to this straight away. It's got to be on the back of stage 1 and 2. But from a recruitment point of view, there are significant challenges to denormalize the interview. And a couple of specific things here would be look beyond interviews, look beyond CVs, look more towards task tests, look more for the specific skills that you're trying to get rather than the average of a job description or in testing in traditional ways. Now, this has been a massive whistle stop. I could talk for hours. It's time bound. Need to leave 5 minutes for any questions that are arising. But hopefully you take away some really simple key messages, which is highly relevant to this data audience, that this is about justice, but it's also about performance, that it's extremely common, 1 in 7 people, many of whom have skills that can unlock really complex business problems. And there are many examples of that and many examples in society and history. But also you've got to be strategic in the way you build towards this. And there is a very, very simple 1, 2, 3, which can be achieved at relative pace, but you can't just jump to recruitment because otherwise you recruit people and you'll lose them very, very quickly. So that's, I've got a pace. Hopefully it's all makes sense. And it's sort of a useful way to kick off the conference. As I said, I've advocated on this subject for a decade or so. So I'm really, really thrilled to be able to share some of those messages with you today and really happy to discuss anything now or indeed in a subsequent follow-up. So thank you very much for listening.
Thank you very much, Mark. That was really inspiring. I must admit, really, thank you very much for this great presentation. Do we have any questions from the audience? Any questions? I'm sure you guys have questions. Or maybe I can just make a first remark. Working at Orange, we have, you know, we are a group. We are a very big company, and there are about 70,000 people in France. So how do you think this HR, management shift should occur in big companies such as Orange, for instance?
Well, in such a big organization, you are almost certain it would be impossible not to have some senior people who have some form of neurodiversity. And if that ignition point, that normalization of the conversation can be from senior managers within, then that's the shortcut. For us, one of our EXCO members talks actively and positively about what her dyslexia brings. And that really accelerates the conversation. So as with anything, it's about leadership. The closer it starts to the top, the better, because of course, the shadow of a leader is greater the higher up they are. But of course, there is a little bit of a chicken and egg here in terms of even senior people feeling comfortable to talk about it without feeling like they're going to be exposing themselves to ridicule or negativity. But you will definitely have some people with neurodiversity, very senior in the organization, who could be the pave makers and help to establish a movement.
That really rings a bell to me. So, going to the audience, do you guys have any questions? Please, don't be shy. I'm sure you have one. Yeah, come on.
So whilst we're waiting for a question, I'll just give one example to whet the appetite. So, insurance is obviously all about data. And we have very, very complex data sets as we try and bring in big data, ingest more data into our ecosystem. We had a challenge which a team of six analysts were really struggling to crack. So we went to Auticon, which is an organization which only places people with autism. They found an individual who managed to complete what we thought would be a 6-month project individually in 3 months with added value on top. It was a learning experience for all of us because it required different nurturance from a people management point of view. But if I did the numbers, it was somewhere between 12 and 20 times more efficient and effective to have one individual whose brain was perfectly matched to the data tasks we had, as opposed to a team of really, really smart analysts who actually their collective brain wasn't even as good. So there's some great examples where really tricky data problems can be unlocked through that perfectly fitting mind.
Yeah, we have one question from Glenn, and please.
Hi, Mark. This is Fabio. Just one question, because some of the the neurodiversity you mentioned in one of your slides were sort of familiar, I guess, the name and probably how it sort of looks to the outside to most people, but some were unfamiliar to me. So I would imagine, are some of these neurodiversity situations not very visible? And if it is, how do we make sure that organizations can almost encourage people to feel safe and open to talk about it, so then the organization can understand what the superpower is that they have available?
Yeah, I think it's about creating a virtuous circle. More communication, more conversation, more acceptance, more confidence of individuals. I think probably the biggest single thing that we have done, which helps a lot of people to get through this, is to pay for diagnoses. So we will pay for diagnoses for ADHD, autism, and dyslexia, where there is a sort of an established, repeatable diagnosis process. And I think that's a big signal from the organization, because it says, we are for this. We support it. We want to help you through your diagnosis, because without a diagnosis, it can be hard to move forward. So I think that's a really straightforward symbol. And it's not cheap, but it's also not very expensive either. So we think that that's a really big sort of junction point to elevate the conversation.
Thank you, Mark. Appreciate it.
Can you just mention again, there's someone on the chat, the organization that was just mentioned? The name of the organization. You mentioned one organization.
Auticon, which is a recruitment specialist for autistic people, if that's what the question was. So yeah, I think they work in US, so. Germany, UK, expanding out, because they do it's a great business model and is repeatable globally.
Thanks, Mark. We have another question from Larry. Larry, are you on? Larry Seidman.
I asked it.
Hi there. Is that you, Larry?
Yeah, you asked the question already.
Oh, you asked. Okay, okay, great. All right, perfect.
Thank you.
And there's so please, just a reminder, people, you need to use the Q&A user on the chat and not send a question to everyone. So please use the Q&A, okay? So, well, I think that that was a great keynote. Thank you very much, Mark. It's very inspiring, and we will definitely take some great takeaways from your presentation.